What if I told you that in the darkest hours of World War II, the US government secretly planned to abandon Europe to Nazi Germany? Not just retreat, but completely leave the continent behind, letting Hitler's forces reign unchecked. It sounds unthinkable. Yet, classified documents and declassified memos reveal a chilling contingency that could have changed history forever. By 1942, the war was at its peak. Europe was a battleground, and the Nazis controlled large swaths of territory. Britain was holding on, but barely. The Soviet Union was bearing the brunt on the Eastern Front. The US had just entered the war, but there were serious doubts inside the government about the feasibility of a full-scale invasion. Some military leaders feared that the American public and, even politicians, might never support a prolonged European conflict. The question became, what if it's impossible to stop Hitler? This fear gave rise to what insiders called the Continental Contingency. The Continental Contingency was a plan drafted in secret by the Joint Chiefs of Staff. In 1942, it proposed that if the Allies could not successfully land and hold Europe, the US should focus all resources on defending the Western Hemisphere, primarily North and South America. The plan outlined evacuations of key personnel and infrastructure, destroying anything that might aid the Axis powers if they advanced. Entire ports, factories, and military bases were to be razed to the ground. The idea was brutal: let Europe burn, but keep America safe at all costs. This was not a public plan. It was so secret, even many government officials were unaware. The fear wasn't just military defeat, it was the collapse of the American economy and public morale. Some historians suggest that the plan was more than just contingency. It reflected deep isolationist sentiment in Washington at the time. To understand the mindset of the US government, you need to look back at the pre-war years. Isolationism wasn't just a political strategy, it was a widely supported ideology. The trauma of World War had left Americans deeply skeptical of foreign entanglements. The America First Committee, backed by powerful industrialists and even celebrities like Charles Lindbergh, preached staying out of European wars. Even after Hitler invaded Poland in 1939, a large portion of the US population still opposed entering the war. FDR had to walk a tightrope. He supported Britain and the fight against fascism, but couldn't publicly push for war until Pearl Harbor forced the issue. The Continental Contingency was born out of this reality. It wasn't necessarily a reflection of cowardice, but of cold strategic calculation. What if Germany took Britain? What if the Soviet Union collapsed? What if a beachhead in Europe proved impossible to sustain? In that scenario, planners believed the smartest move was to fortify the Western Hemisphere, from Alaska to Argentina, and prevent the war from ever reaching American shores. The United States began secretly mapping out defensive perimeters around the Caribbean, the Panama Canal, and key points along the East Coast. Military engineers were instructed to reinforce bases in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and even Central America. Submarines would patrol Atlantic choke points, and radar systems were expanded to monitor transoceanic threats. The idea wasn't just theoretical. Resources were quietly being allocated in case Europe was lost. A grim acceptance that America's reach might have to shrink. But not everyone agreed. There was fierce internal debate about the moral and strategic implications of such a plan. Franklin D. Roosevelt, despite his pragmatic side, believed that abandoning Europe meant abandoning the ideals of democracy, freedom, and international cooperation. He feared that if America turned inward again, it would permanently lose its global influence. He pushed for increased aid to Britain and the Soviet Union even before the US officially joined the war. Programs like Lend-Lease were controversial, but vital. They helped keep Britain afloat and gave the Red Army the resources it needed to push back against Nazi advances. In the military, figures like General George Marshall and Admiral Ernest King also questioned the Continental Contingency. They knew that if Hitler gained full control of Europe, the war would eventually reach American shores, no matter what. There would be no safe hemisphere. So they began pushing for Operation Bolero. The buildup of American forces in the UK, it was the first step toward D-Day. A plan many believed was the only real path to victory. Yet the Continental Contingency never fully died. It remained in classified war rooms, in what-if memos, and in emergency scenarios. And in moments of doubt, some officials quietly considered reviving it. especially in 1943, when early Allied offensives in North Africa and Italy struggled. There was fear that the invasion of France would fail, and that retreat might be necessary. Contingency plans were updated, including the destruction of supply lines and mass evacuations. If the Nazis had repelled the D-Day landings, the U.S. might have pulled back across the Atlantic. Declassified documents from the National Archives confirm that between 1942 and 1944, the Office of Strategic Services drafted escape plans for U.S. operatives in Europe. Some of these included coded maps showing safe houses and underground routes to neutral territory. Entire naval contingents were designated for rapid withdrawal missions, and American embassies throughout Europe had pre-written orders for destruction of classified material and diplomatic exit strategies. It wasn't just about abandoning allies. It was about containing a global fire before it consumed the Western Hemisphere. One internal memo chillingly stated, "If Europe falls, the oceans are no longer walls, they are highways." British intelligence also played a role in trying to keep the U.S. engaged. They fed Washington constant updates about Hitler's atrocities, hoping to stir moral urgency. They shared intercepted communications and inflated German strength estimates to counteract American skepticism. Churchill knew that if the U.S. fell back, Britain would fall next. This cooperation, part persuasion, part desperation, helped nudge U.S. leaders toward full engagement. Historians have speculated on how different the world might look today if the plan had been enacted. A Nazi-dominated Europe could have lasted a generation. Resistance movements may have been crushed. Nuclear weapons, once developed, might have become the only tool left for regaining lost ground. And the Cold War might have been between Nazi Germany and the United States, not the USSR. But it didn't happen. Thanks to the bravery of Allied soldiers, the resilience of the Soviet resistance, and bold leadership from figures like FDR and Churchill, the plan remained on paper. America committed to Europe, and history changed course. Still, the existence of the Continental Contingency is a reminder that history is not just made of battles and speeches. It's also made of fears, what-ifs, and almosts. The documents we uncovered paint a picture of a government preparing for the worst, hedging against defeat, and ready to turn inward if all else failed. Today, some of those same debates echo in our world. How much should one nation sacrifice for another? When does defense become abandonment? And when do contingency plans become self-fulfilling prophecies? If you found this story fascinating, subscribe for more history you weren't supposed to learn. And drop a comment below. What other secret government plans should we uncover next?